Maine's taxation committee has endorsed a bill that would help keep the Portland Sea Dogs in Maine.
Sea Dogs need to spend $8 to $10 million upgrading Hadlock Field to bring the ballpark in line with Major League Baseball's requirements for its minor league affiliates. If the team fails to do so, they might be relocated.
The bill, sponsored by Senate President Troy Jackson, would provide the team up to a $1 million tax credit to help offset some of the cost. Teams have until April 2025 to make necessary upgrades, or they will lose their affiliation.
The vote by the state's committee was 8-4 with bipartisan support. Hadlock Field is owned by the city of Portland, but it's on the team to make necessary upgrades.
Officials say plans have already started for construction of a new clubhouse, and the team is waiting on a decision on the bill to move forward.